Good morning, members of the press and members of the public. Today, I am pleased to release the first of an ongoing series of quarterly reports on gross domestic product, otherwise known as GDP, which measures overall economic activity. As Minister of Finance, I have been concerned that Bermudians have been forced to interpret from time to time economic data and the results of some surveys and opinion polls masquerading as economic data. One of my main concerns is that the public, the press, and the politically opinionated reflect on information that is sometimes so outdated that its value in assisting us to understand our present-day circumstances and our future prospects is very limited indeed. For example, we can have data that can be almost a year old that are framed in the context as though they were today's status quo. The Bermudian public may draw the wrong conclusions under such circumstances. I'm happy today to report more current data that has been prepared by the Department of Statistics. It highlights a rise in economic activity as measured by GDP, both in nominal and real terms during the first quarter of 2015. Compared to the first quarter of 2014, GDP this year grew by 3.7% in nominal terms and 2.2% adjusted for inflation or real terms. This is good news and clearly indicative of the fact that the economy is growing and the latest evidence of an improved economic outlook. Our efforts to stimulate investor interest in Bermuda are continuing to bear fruit, providing increased prospects for the future. But we are not standing still. The government intends to continue to pursue policies and projects that stimulate the economy. We believe this is the correct strategy to ensure substantial improvements in tangible opportunities for Bermudian entrepreneurs, companies, and employees. There is a growing confidence in Bermuda's economy and its future, a confidence that is shining through the oppressive gloom of negative political rhetoric. We will need that enthusiasm and optimism as we continue our road back towards a balanced budget through fiscal prudence. This new data, read together with other economic figures recently released, is good reason for renewed optimism after years of challenges. Just days ago, you heard from the quarterly bulletin of statistics that central government revenue is up. And in the face of much pressure, efforts continue throughout government to control government spending. For the same period, across the island, employment income grew, and total expenditure by air visitors was nearly 20%, 19.3% to be exact, year over year. The number of new business registrations is also up for the quarter. In hotels, employment numbers rose, and gross receipts, that is money paid to hoteliers, was also marginally up. Last month, the government released statistics which showed that the value of retail sales grew for 9 consecutive months through the month of May. And to the end of April, the volume of retail sales grew for 5 consecutive months. These two are all indications of optimism. But we should caution that there is still a long road ahead. The government remains focused on creating the investment environment, I should say, that will bring long-term job opportunities for all Bermudians across the employment spectrum. Let us not forget that before there is a new job, you must have an employer. And before there is an employer, there must be investment. That's why we are focused on increasing investment in our island. And we remain joined to the battle of gaining control of runaway spending without harsh and draconian austerity measures that would bring more hardship to our community. Boosting public revenues and controlling public spending will lead us to a more balanced approach of living within our means. And ultimately, that will provide the environment needed to begin whittling away at the country's public debt. Those are the end of my prepared remarks. Of course, I am willing to answer any questions you may have. No questions?
This may not be a fair question. Is there any level of communication between yourself and your shadow to sort of alleviate this gloom of negative political rhetoric you refer to?
I guess not. The negative rhetoric is a fact of life in Bermuda's environment right now, and we certainly would like to be in a position where we could move away from that and move towards a more balanced approach. But I was in the opposition once, for a long time, in fact, and I never engaged in this kind of destructive, negative rhetoric that we see today. So it really is up to the opposition to conduct themselves in a way that is, not necessarily more positive, but less toxic.
Mr. Richards, 2,000 jobs were promised, 1,000 jobs have been lost while you've been in government thus far, so that's 3,000. The talk shows are still inundated daily of people that are unemployed, that are frustrated. Just this week, numbers came out. 7 members were hired by the fire service. 5 are spouses of Bermudians. 2 are Bermudians. It seems to me that Bermudians seem to be pushed to the back. A lot of people are frustrated. Can your administration get these jobs that are required or and needed?
People like to throw employment numbers around, as you just done, and we don't have good employment data. I certainly don't have any data that says 1,000 jobs have been lost. As I stand here right now, any employment data that you may refer to is a year old. So we can't make comments on stuff that's really out of date. Let me say this. We are still focused on creating 2,000 jobs. We said we'd do that in our first term. Our first term is half over. We're making progress insofar as that's concerned. Let me say this about, and I guess it's a reflection on something I saw on television recently, about people feeling that this government is anti-Bermudian or don't put Bermudians first. Everything we do, it has the ultimate goal of benefiting Bermudians. But people have to understand 1 or 2 things about how the economy of Bermuda works. Every dollar that we have, let me do this. I look in my wallet. I invite you to look in your wallet. And I'll tell you that every dollar in your wallet, in my wallet, in everybody in Bermuda's wallet, every dollar comes from overseas. Every dollar. You look in your bank account, whether it's got $2 in it or $200 million in it. All that money comes from overseas. You think you own a piece of the rock? Well, you may own a piece of the rock, but that value of that piece of the rock comes from money from overseas. If there was no money from overseas, your piece of the rock would be hardly worth anything. Everything that we have in Bermuda comes from overseas, and it comes from people from overseas. So we are focused on where our wealth comes from. Now, if some people want to criticize that and saying that we're not focused on Bermudians, we are focused on the source of wealth for Bermudians. That's what we're focused on. And as Minister of Finance, I am focused on that. I'm not concerned about divisive rhetoric. I'm concerned about where our dollars come from and to get more of it. And that's the key. So when you see what we do, that's the purpose, and that's where it comes from. If people know where the money comes from, then they can more properly interpret what we do as a government to try to increase the lot of Bermudians.
You recently made an announcement about the airport going ahead, or getting closer to going ahead. That was as a result of the SAGE Commissioner's advice that was taken partially. Is there anything else you can share with us that you are considering imminently that came from that SAGE Commission?
Well, there is a civil service reform that is still underway. It's taking forever, as far as I'm concerned, but it's still ongoing. You know, one of the things that was on the is in the SAGE Commission was that we should try to do a better job of controlling government costs, and that we should try to reduce the government deficit on a glide path as opposed to precipitously. You know, we have a lot of detractors who want us to fire a bunch of civil servants. And then we have some other folks who have come in recently in the last couple of days who said, well, you know, civil servants are great people. And they all deserve what they get in terms of salaries. I'm not going to comment on you know, the civil servants, whether they deserve what they get. But I do know that our policy is to reduce the deficit according to a glide path, as opposed to firing a bunch of people. You know, nobody in the Bermuda government is Ronald Reagan, where he fired, you know, thousands of air traffic controllers. In Mr. Reagan's case, those air traffic controllers didn't live close to him. But in Bermuda's case, if we did that, all those folks that we fired would be showing up at my front door and the Premier's front door the next day. So we cannot do that. We have to do this gradually, not so gradually that we'll never get there, but we have to do this in such a way where we can minimize the negativity and give ourselves a chance to grow the economy to help pay for running the government.